You were successfully part of a Hannum drumline for a year or two or four, and that is not an insignificant thing.
Yes. However, I had this conversation with Tom after I graduated. I was up in Old Chapel back when we were still there. This is 91, maybe 92. And I was in his office. I said, "Oh my gosh, Tom, these kids that you're bringing in, like, holy smokes, they're so good." And he goes, "There's going to be no more Mike JOLINs."
Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of August 4th, 2025. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a rising light follow-up story, a tale of a Boston area corps, more shameless self-promotion, and I have a conversation with a recently retired lieutenant colonel. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. Alert and or regular dear listeners may notice a detail about this episode that is entirely explicable, and I shall indeed explic. Although some of my very newest dear listeners will already know exactly where this is going, and to you I say welcome and thank you, and you already know what's going on. As noted in last week's episode, I spent 4 days last week in the world of the George Parks Drum Major Academy, and as a staff member who led a number of instructional sessions, let's just say that I utilized my voice more in 4 days than I had done in about the last 4 weeks. I tried to do it in a healthy way, proper air support, all that stuff that's very important to those of us who are also church choir directors. What is this, choir wagon? But alas, I'm not sick. I feel fine. I'm just all talked out. So this episode will be a bit more bass than baritone, except for the trio section, which I recorded mere hours before heading out to Westfield State University for the DMA clinic. So grab that extra bag of throat lozenges, and away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline State College, Pennsylvania. The Penn State Blue Band has named Ellie Sheehan as drum major for the 2025-2026 season. She is the first woman to hold the position in the band's 126-year history. A fifth-year student majoring in marketing with a minor in digital media trends and analytics, the Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania native previously served as a leader in the piccolo section. Sheehan will take her first front flip on the field at Beaver Stadium on August 30th when the Nittany Lions host the University of Nevada. Dateline Washington, D.C., I suppose. Back in March, in episode 53 of this podcast, we were introduced to Kevin Sherensry. Kevin is a composer of Thai ancestry who wrote, among other things, a piece called Rising Light. You may recall that I had a chance to record a conversation with him just after he appeared on CNN, talking in both places about how that piece had been programmed for a U.S. Marine Band concert, which was going to feature the members of the Equity Arc Ensemble from Chicago. And you may recall that the performance was called off in the wake of a presidential executive order that was, shall we say, inimical to anything that smacked of a DEI initiative. The planned performance indeed did just that. In fact, it really highlighted issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion from a programming perspective and a personnel perspective. There was a happy ending to that story, of sorts, when a pack of military band alumni got together and formed their own band and made that performance happen after all, albeit without the official help of the President's Own, as had been the original plan. And you might have thought, as I did, that this might be the end of the story. Turns out, no. Kevin Sherensry released a statement a couple of weeks ago about what I would consider is a remarkable development given the current state of things in our federal government, and this is that statement. Quote, "I am honored that my piece, Rising Light, has been acquired by the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. This milestone belongs to the people, conductors, musicians, and audiences who brought this work to life. Since its creation in 2022, this piece stands as a work of peaceful protest and unapologetic celebration, despite our Asian American community being under attack from post-COVID Asian hate. I wanted, first and foremost, for this piece to surpass music and to be written for the people. I'm deeply grateful that with this milestone, this work has become and will stay for the people. It is a testament to our collective struggle, yet perseverance, in one of the most renowned museums in the world. My father has always told me, Life is not defined by the lows nor the highs. What defines you is how you get up. When I met with museum curator Theodore Gonzalez, he approached me with the idea of this piece being evidence of the communal response of Asian Americans and allies, rather than the victimization of our community. He assured me that although this piece gained national attention from the cancellation of its performance by the President's own U.S. Marine Band by an executive order, this piece will illustrate the beautiful communal response rather than the act which caused it. Our Asian American community and our allies have gone through significant hardship. Both individually and collectively, there have been attempts to silence our voices. To my community, I hear you, I see you, and I understand you. But there is a beautiful story we, the people, can rise and tell. I am honored that the Smithsonian has given my community and myself a national platform for our voices to be heard, and I look forward to continuing to be a small part in the writing of the Asian American history. And that's news and notes from the band world. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick water break. Meet you on the other side. Hope you'll stay with me. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this episode's second strain, I guess you could say that this week, annually the first or second week of August, depending on how the calendar falls, is something of a high holy week in the world of the marching arts. It is the week of DCI finals. The senior corps, all-age corps folks amongst us used to jump up at a statement like that and say, fella, remember that Labor Day weekend is a big deal in our corner of the marching world? But as of last year, something happened which does tend to happen in American life, namely the subsuming of organizations by larger organizations. And so, with the incorporation of DCA into the DCI operation and schedule and such, Finals Week is a place for everyone. My own history with competitive drum and bugle corps is entirely vicarious. As a woodwind player, well, accounting for the drum corps path of a few of my friends, I should say, as a woodwind player who started on a brass instrument but felt he had no great facility for going back to brass, i.e. didn't literally have the chops for it, my role has been to stand on the sideline, metaphorically, and clap. And catch my breath, increasingly, over time, as I've recognized just what increasingly ferocious physical and musical demands have been placed upon the participants. It's just remarkable what can be done out there in what has been given the marketing tagline, Marching's Major League. As Chris Serrard described in episode 65, as she was talking about her own marching performance history and preferences, drum corps and college bands are two distinct versions of the same basic idea, and one is not empirically better than the other, it just depends what you're looking for. The first time I ever saw a drum corps show was on Thanksgiving weekend of 1987. But Rob, they compete in the summer. I know. I was a college senior, home for Thanksgiving, and while TV channel surfing, I landed on my local PBS station and saw what appeared to be a marching band. And the broadcast kept not cutting away to football scores. Obviously, I stopped cold. You never saw a band on TV for more than a split second. You still don't. What was going on? What was going on was, every Thanksgiving weekend, PBS would broadcast an edited highlights package of DCI finals, usually a chunk of the 5th through 2nd place corps, and then the full 1st place show, and then the retreat and scores announcement. So I had stumbled onto the Blue Devils finishing their 1987 show with a typically screaming arrangement of Harlem Nocturne, and then I saw the Garfield Cadets Appalachian Spring production. Talk about setting the bar high. Having marched at UMass, I had seen cadets' jackets loitering about, and in the 3 or 4 years that followed my Thanksgiving TV revelation, I came to understand that the corps that lived closest to me, and which was attracting some of my UMass marching colleagues, was a little group called the Boston Crusaders. I first saw them live at a show in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. A couple of UMass marching friends of mine who lived in Pittsfield invited me to join them in being local volunteer helpers. Every corps that came into town for the, let's say for the sake of argument, Tuesday evening show would roll into town at something like 2 o'clock Tuesday morning, after having left their Monday night show in Rome, New York, and 2 or 3 Pittsfielders would be there to meet them. And we, because for 3 summers I joined my friends in this effort, I say we, would be metaphorically attached to the corps for about 24 hours. The laundromat's down that way. The CVS is down that way. What else do you need? We'll get it for you. And in return, our reward was to be able to watch as much of their morning and afternoon rehearsals as we could when we weren't running errands for them, and then to watch the show that night from down on the sideline. Pretty cool. So, in early August of 1988, from the sideline of, it was Wacona Park, so the football field was located in the outfield, the pit was right around second base, and the sideline was kind of just behind home plate. But from there I saw the Cavaliers' Firebird Suite show, I saw the Troopers, and I saw the Porgy and Bess show of our adoptive corps, the pink and white-clad Star of Indiana. In early August of 1989, our adoptive corps was the Skyriders, which then hailed from Hutchinson, Kansas. And in summer 1990, the three of us, Lynn, Nancy, and I, were attached to the Boston Crusaders. It happened to be their 50th anniversary season, and as it happened, their percussion book had been written by some lightweight named Tom Hannum. So we three UMassers were kind of ready to see this outfit. Throughout the early 1990s, I got to corps shows in New England at which the Crusaders performed, and I got used to seeing the red uniform tops, the shakos with the black plumes, the white sashes across the chest with the silver buckle, the black pants, and the white shoes. And I got used to hearing, at some point during the field show, those brass hits. Which, of course, was the secret code. 2 hits, a single hit, and then 3 hits, standing for the second, first, and third letters of the alphabet, which themselves all stood for Boston Area Corps. There are people in the world who know what it really stood for. Now, it's important, particularly going into this year's DCI Finals Week, to remember at least one thing. In the late 1980s and early 90s, when I first got to see them, the Boston Crusaders were a perennial 15th, 16th, 17th place corps. As the Cadets and Blue Devils and a few other top-tier corps were filling out that top tier by stretching the limits of what Drum Corps thought it could do, there were other corps who were working to keep up with them, and some that appeared to be quite comfortable with the concept of this is how we've always done it. The Crusaders seemed, to me at least, to be wrestling with those two ideas. We want to compete with the groups that have emerged as the big dogs thanks to their willingness to innovate, but we also want to honor our past and Drum Corps' past because it keeps our alumni feeling like their beloved organization hasn't left them behind. And, to my eye at least, it created strain that any organization, marching or otherwise, would have a hard time mitigating. It created difficult terrain to navigate. It created situations which, in many cases, were not the Boston Crusaders doing, necessarily, but which were their problems to solve. And in not solving them to the liking of the judges, it kept them firmly out of the top 12 on finals night. In 1994, they got to 13th place, missed it by that much, and that was the year in which finals was held in Foxborough, Massachusetts, at the home of the New England Patriots. I can only imagine the disappointment when semifinals scores were announced and the hometown corps didn't make it to finals on their home turf. There were other elements that contributed to the corps not making it out of semifinals for all that time, pretty much since the inception of Drum Corps International in the mid-1970s, but I guess they got solved, because sometime in the summer of 1999, I got word from a friend that, guess what? Boston landed in 9th place at the end of everything, and then the summer after that, 5th place. This, given my understandings and observations of the BAC of the previous dozen or so years, was mind-blowing to me. What in the world had happened to get Boston anywhere near the Cadets, Cavaliers, Blue Devils, Santa Clara Vanguard? It was quite honestly not unlike the moment that came a year and a half later for long-suffering fans of another New England competitive organization that had broken free of its history and found previously unlikely levels of success. You know, the upstart New England Patriots beating the St. Louis Rams to take their first ever Super Bowl victory. In ensuing years, before a particularly important Patriots playoff game or Super Bowl appearance, I would occasionally post on Facebook this basic thought. For those who have difficulty pulling for the Patriots at this time, please allow me this one moment of let's go team, since I remember being a fan of the team in the days when they, drank through a straw. And so, this year in Drum Corps, do please allow me this one moment. The Boston Crusaders have placed first in all but at most a handful of competitions this summer, and after having placed second, fourth, and second in the competitive DCI seasons since the activity emerged from its COVID time, they're in position to win their version of the Super Bowl. And in this case, I'm not a fair weather fan. I've been critical of the way they've gone about their business from time to time in the past, but then we New England sports fans are nothing if not discerning and demanding. But we are also very loud in our support, and that support is, I think, at least sometimes, born of patience and the understanding that human beings run these organizations. And as such, these organizations will experience poor judgment and bad planning and not coming through in the clutch, but they will also, from time to time, experience what it's like for all the pieces to fall into place, all the planning to come to fruition, and all the right kinds of magic to occur. This Saturday evening, we'll find out. But from today till Friday, we'll experience the painfully delicious time in which amazing stuff could and probably will happen, and during which our hopes have still not been dashed, and during which you can't count anybody out. And, with apologies to all the other corps out there, a great many of which will end up literally hundreds of adjudicated points separated from the big prize, and any of whose shows would have beaten up mercilessly on the DCI championship shows of 10 and 20 and 30 years ago. Here we go, Boston. Light 'em up. Have a giant week.
Okay, let's change keys and get into the trio section. In this episode's trio section, I'm pleased to be joined by a gentleman with whom I go back a certain number of years, and I suspect that a decent number of my listeners have known him for quite a while as well, or actually you just think you do. His official formal resume includes practical applications of his considerable background in the legal profession. It also includes service in the offices of a number of prominent Rhode Island political figures, as well as genuine legal innovations in support of military veterans, as an example. It also includes the backstopping of a number of bands, not all of them win bands. And it includes a tour in Afghanistan and a Bronze Star medal, among other accolades. And I'm going to promise you that's the tip of the iceberg. You're going to learn something new about him in the next stretch of podcast time, no matter who you are. So please help me welcome to the program, recently retired from the United States Army, Lieutenant Colonel Mike JOLIN. Mike, great to see you.
Rob, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. As I was saying to you earlier, right before we started the podcast, if I ever needed a publicist, I think you are it.
Sometimes the material elevates the publicizing. Yes, and so you've worked very hard to downplay all that build-up because you're that kind of person. But there are a bunch of really interesting things that you've done, and I know we'll look at a few of them through the band and the musical lens that we share. But first, I will open this, as I always do, with some quick questions that are born out of the band activity, because after all, this podcast is what it is. So, what's your primary instrument?
In truth, my primary instrument is the bass guitar. In terms of how you know me is as a drummer. With marching band, I started off as a bass drummer, and then I became a quad player at UMass. In high school, I was a bass drummer, but also then I became a snare drummer. This will be a theme, but I was a mediocre drummer. So I took up the bass guitar in high school because the other drummer in my high school marching band was a really good drummer. My brother was a guitarist, and we had a little garage band. So that's how I took up bass. And so these days, I've kind of stuck with the bass, and that's what I play now.
So that takes care of the next question that I usually ask, which is how'd you get into playing that instrument? But was there a particular moment that said to you early in your life, yeah, percussion?
The origin story is an interesting one. I went to a Catholic high school. I was a public school kid up until that point. I grew up in Rehoboth, Mass. But I went to Bishop Feian High School in Attleboro. I was a freshman at Bishop Feian, never played music, didn't play sports. I was a very quiet, introverted, skinny little kid. Didn't know anybody. Rehoboth, small town. The one person I knew decided to join band. She asked me, hey, join band. I said, well, I don't play anything. And she said, this is going to sound familiar, band is for everyone. I don't know where she learned that, but maybe it's just intuitive, but obviously it's in the air. So I said, okay. And they put me in the drum section. Next thing I know, I'm hitting a big bass drum and taking lessons, and that's how I got started.
I don't know that I've talked to a lot of people who started in with an instrument as relatively late in school as that.
Yeah, and that might have been why I never quite had the mastery of some of the people I played with. maybe why I always thought I was playing catch up. So maybe that's some of my sense of humility because I saw, I played with some wonderful players and maybe they had a head start. Maybe they were just had more talent. Who knows? But still, it was a joy to play with them, and it was a joy to actually have something to focus on in high school, to have a tribe, if you would, and frankly, to play music. There's few things that are more, I find, enjoyable, no matter what level or what genre or in what enterprise.
Let's cut right to it. You and I crossed paths at UMass Amherst, and the drumline there involved a certain Thomas Hannum. And famously, the man runs a tight ship, and the drum lines that he has produced historically over a very long period of time have been the kind of things that I have looked at both recently and certainly while I was a student in that band. I've looked over and said, how in the world does anybody get into that drum line? So I've looked at a number of people who have professed to, not being the world's most standout percussionist, and I've looked at them and said, yes, but still, you, do I want to say survived? No, you you were successfully part of a Hannum drum line for a year or two or four, and that is not an insignificant thing.
Yes. However, I had this conversation with Tom after I graduated. I was up in Old Chapel back when we were still there. This is 91, maybe 92. And I was in his office, right next to George's office there. We were just chatting. I said, oh my gosh, Tom, these kids that you're bringing in, like, holy smokes, they're so good. And frankly, I know we were good. I'm not going to lie, and sure, maybe I was the least among us, but I was decent, otherwise I wouldn't be playing.
Yeah.
But the kid next to me was Colin McNutt. You know what I'm saying? So, Tom wasn't yelling at me. He was yelling at Colin. And the reason he was yelling at Colin, because he knew Colin had potential, and Colin was a freshman and I was a senior. So he knew, like, okay, like JOLIN's not messing this up too bad. So he's graduating, but Colin is the future. So I'm going to really work on him and make sure he's doing his thing. But I'm putting that aside. So I'm talking to Tom. He goes, there's going to be no more Mike JOLINs. That's what he said to me. He said, the era of the Mike JOLINs where you kind of come in as a okay player and get better and better. And that era pretty much was over. You kind of come in and you're already playing at the Colin McNutt level. Oh, that's probably unfair because Colin was Colin, but closer to the Colin McNutt level. It's a true story, by the way. He did say that there got to be no more Mike JOLINs.
And I suspect that even in that moment, you knew what he meant and you knew that he wasn't dumping on you.
No, it was, to be fair, right? My freshman year was 1986.
Mm-hmm.
He joined, 1984 as the assistant band director. I know he'd been there a couple of years before as a grad student. So this was like, the second or third year of the evolution. We had Joel Giddle and, Todd Morrison, Jim Hoover, Bill McGrath, Dave Newcomb, some really good players. They all marched drum corps. And that's when it really was like, okay, it's a new era, which was wonderful. But I couldn't get into that drum line.
So this will be an odd leap, but the question that I ask at the end of this opening blast of questions is, what's your current band-related role?
So there's two different paths that I've been on in my most recent life. In my civilian life, I've been playing bass guitar a lot, both in different cover bands, like your classic rock cover bands, playing in bars and different things of that sort. But more recently, kind of like in a school of rock type setting. So you have that part of it, which has been wonderful. It keeps me playing. It keeps me improving because I play different types of songs, whether I like them or not. So there's that. But there's also been this wonderful blessing that I've had at the end of my military career. Most of my career, I've been an Army lawyer, a JAG officer. But the last 2.5 years, I was asked to be the band commander. So most National Guards around the nation have an Army band, and they're at the same standard or close to the same standards as most Army bands. Not the permanent DC bands like the Army Field Band or the President's Own, but those top-notch DC bands. But even the other bands that are assigned to the big divisions, like the 10th Mountain Division Band, and some of the other, they're wonderful musicians, as you probably know. But the bands for the National Guard, they're part-time, but they're still a very high caliber musician. Most of them are music majors. A lot of them have masters. Most of them are music teachers, and they still do this on the side. So I got to command for the Rhode Island National Guard, the 88th Army Band. Even though I didn't play much with them, because I did play a little bass with them, but that was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to be around these great young musicians and see them perform in various venues and different genres of music.
I'm trying to decide whether I read, probably on the social medias, that you were starting that up. My immediate question, I'm pretty sure I got in touch and I asked you, are you conducting? That's really cool. And you smiled and said,
No, that would not be good for anybody. So normally there's what they call a band master, and there's a specialized military occupational specialty for that, an MOS for those who are in the military, the Army would know what that is, where they train you to be a band master, and it's typically, oftentimes, it's a music professional that knows exactly how to conduct. It's very much a very specific thing. So we have a few of our soldiers who have master's degrees, in music performance or in composition, who like to conduct, who know how to conduct, who have taken classes. So the bandmaster typically does it, but oftentimes there are enlisted conductors that also do it. Because I'm not a bandmaster, I'm an Army lawyer who's kind of filling in as the commander. The enlisted conductor just handles that full time.
In retrospect, I got thinking and realizing, oh yes, so the director of a drum corps doesn't get up on the podium and exhort the crowd. They make sure that the buses are ordered, and they make sure that all the admin is happening such that the musicians don't end up by the side of the road, or they don't end up in the wrong place, and all of that business.
The thing is, like, the bandmaster does all that. So that's why it's an incredibly hard job, because you have the logistics, the admin, and the music part of the they do it all, which is why they have enlisted conductors also, so you can share the load. Because oftentimes they'll start the show. So if you've ever seen the 215th Army Band of the Massachusetts National Guard, Chief Martins, who's the band master, he's a wonderful musician, a wonderful soldier and commander, and he's been a great friend to the 88th. He'll lead off, do a couple of pieces, and then he'll turn it over and give opportunities for his soldiers to lead. Give him a little break, and he's also a drummer and a trombone player, so he'll play, and then he'll take over and finish. So, not to put in a plug, but if anybody under the age of, I would say even 40, and you're somewhat physically fit, and you get paid, you get to play music with some absolutely wonderful musicians on a part-time basis. Yeah, just a wonderful opportunity to serve your community, play some music, and it's just terrific.
I don't believe there are any shameless plugs.
Yeah.
Interesting that you talk about the age range of the people who would be likely to join up and all of that. That applies to you. You joined up not exactly straight out of college.
That is very true. I'm a late bloomer, both with music. I didn't start my music career until, high school. And then with the Army, I always wanted to serve. Maybe that's why I really liked marching band, because I liked the uniforms. I liked marching and, the dress right dress aspect of it. But I never thought I had the right stuff. And I think that was kind of being a shy, introverted, skinny little kid. And realizing that was such a fallacy, and just, I don't know why I thought that. But again, it's not to say that the Army is for everyone, but it's more for everyone than people realize. But anyway, life got in the way. I went to school, went to law school, and then I got too old, or thought I was too old. And then 9/11 happened, and I still thought I was too old. And then Iraq happened, which I think we all recognize, as a policy matter was a disaster. And then as a strategic matter was, maybe tactically was a success in terms of the initial part, but wasn't well thought out. Okay, now what? But because of that, it allowed people like me, who are really old, to then join the military. And so by this time, I'd kind of realized I did have the right stuff. And I said, why not? And so at age 37, I was eligible because they raised the age limit because they needed people to join. And I said, you know what? Even though I was not a fan of this action, I took advantage of it and joined the military. At the time that I learned that they raised the age limit to serve, it was 2005, and I was working at the Attorney General's office in the Civil Division for the Rhode Island Attorney General. I liked what I was doing, but wasn't loving it. I was doing some community work, which was meaningful, some nonprofit work. But again, I was kind of missing something else. I've always wanted to serve. I always, that was something. My dad was a Marine way back in the 50s, and I always wanted to kind of follow in his footsteps and just never did. So I was sitting in my office, which I shared with this other attorney, which turns out to be very important later on in my life story. And I heard that they raised the age limit, and I said, oh, okay. So I ended up walking down the hall to the Deputy Attorney General's office, a guy named Jerry Coyne, who's the number 2 guy. So he was a Navy JAG. So that's why I went to his office. And I said, Jerry, I'm thinking of enlisting. So you mean going as a JAG, right? Because you're a lawyer, Mike. He goes, no. I just want to enlist. I just want to serve. Like, I don't want to be a lawyer all the time, right? He goes, well, all right, but you should definitely do it if you can do it. Like, he was very encouraging. So I decided to do that. So yes, I called the recruiter, and he said I was the easiest recruit he ever had because I just said where to sign, and I signed. And I became a truck driver. It's a true story. I became a truck driver. I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia, with a bunch of 17-year-old boys. I was 37. And my drill sergeant was 38, and he said, I'm trying to get out of the Army. Why are you trying to get in the Army? You're a fool. I spent my summer of 2005 running around in the gosh awful heat and humidity of Georgia. But I got through it, and I became a truck driver. Never got sent to Iraq or anything as a truck driver. But I had some wonderful sergeants at my unit. I was in a reserve unit up in Brockton, Mass. And they said, what are you doing? You're a lawyer. You're a specialist, which is an E4, like right before a sergeant. Why are you pushing a broom around a drill hall? You should really be an Army lawyer. Use your education to help the Army and soldiers and yourself. So I did.
So the basic duties of a Judge Advocate General officer, I've got that right.
Yeah, and you know why it's called the Judge Advocate General's Corps?
I will admit I do not.
The Judge Advocate General is a person.
Okay.
So George Washington appointed a Judge Advocate General because he wanted a lawyer to be his Judge Advocate. So he made him a general. So there's Judge Advocate General.
Oh, because all this time I thought that the general was an adjective that wasn't so much a rank. I didn't know that.
No, it's a rank.
Oh.
So there is a Judge Advocate General. So we're the Judge Advocate General's Corps.
Okay.
So even though they call me a JAG, it's not really technically correct because I'm not the...
You're not the guy.
Right. So do you know what we call the guy? We call the guy TJAG, the Judge Advocate General. It's a true story.
Oh, wow.
Just like POTUS, for the President of the United States, or FLOTUS, they call it TJAG, the Judge Advocate General. So, hey, TJAG's coming. All right, we got to look sharp.
Stand up straight.
So, yes. So I joined the JAG Corps. I switched over in 2007.
So the JAG officer's duties involve what now?
I'll give a great lawyer answer. It depends.
Yeah.
So there are like a handful of core disciplines, the most famous being kind of military discipline. You can't handle the truth, the whole Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise scene in A Few Good Men. We have, court-martial and that stuff. And then you have what they kind of generally call administrative law, which is regulations and just kind of general stuff to kind of keep the trains running on time. You need to review different things to make sure they're legal. You also have international law, like the law of war, treaties, Geneva Conventions. I dealt a lot with that when I was deployed to Afghanistan. There's contract law, environmental law. So a lot of it is kind of like typical law, just applied, because the Army or the military is just like any other organization. And there's a couple of other disciplines. But aside from kind of court martials, much of it is just like any other big entity with legal issues.
Making sure the policies are in compliance with whatever codes or laws
Exactly.
that have to be. Okay.
You know, we have big military bases and installations, and that affect the environment. So we have environmental regulations we have to comply with. You know, we have a lot of employees. So you have labor law issues because we have civilian employees. We have different federal employees. We have, you know, just regular employee type issues. It's actually pretty interesting. It's the Army is the biggest law firm in the world. There's more lawyers for the Army than any other institution in the world.
Huh.
Interestingly enough.
It seemed to me in reading up on your background and a lot of the things you've gotten involved with, there is also a certain amount of advocacy that you've been involved with. I mean, lawyers can be employed to prosecute, but they can also be employed to defend. Did you get involved with the defense part of it? Is that a question that makes any sense at all?
Yes, but I can parse it two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think I know which way you're going to go, but I'm going to take it in a slightly different detour, and then I'm going to come back to the way I think you want it to go. So let me stick with the military lane first, and then I'll swing over to the civilian lane. So as a JAG officer, there are a couple of different assignments I had. Either you're working for the command, right? So you have a commander, usually for a larger unit, so like a brigade, which is usually around 3,000 soldiers. So usually you're working for a full bird colonel, which is like right below a general. And so you're working as an office for that colonel. And eventually you become a lieutenant colonel that you're the primary legal advisor for that colonel. And that's what I was. That was probably my favorite assignment as an Army lawyer. So we have a military police brigade in Rhode Island, the 43rd Military Police Brigade. That's what I deployed with to Afghanistan. But I was only a captain at the time, so I was not the primary legal advisor. But I was during COVID, which was interesting in and of itself, because there's a lot of novel stuff going on, which was a great assignment because not like you're making stuff up, but you're really having to figure out what is right based on, you know, issues of first impression, as they say in the law. Like nobody's dealt with this before, so you're just trying to cobble together analogous topics so you can try to make the best decision. So it's fascinating, very intellectually stimulating, and you're obviously trying to help the people of your state and your community. So it's fascinating. So you're advocating for your commander and for your, you know, ultimately for your unit. Another assignment, and this is, I'll stop here for the military part. I was the first trial defense attorney for the state of Rhode Island National Guard. For the longest time, the active component of the Army had a trial defense service, like a public defender for its soldiers.
Yeah.
So you get in trouble, you know, you get caught stealing, you're going to get a public defender, a TDS, a trial defense. It's not Trump derangement syndrome, trial defense service to represent you, you know, because you can't afford it, you know, against when you're getting prosecuted by the command. National Guard, we never had that because we were part-time. They didn't know quite how to make it work because you all worked for the governor and you all worked for very insular, like you all report to the same adjutant general who works for the governor. So how do you kind of, as a JAG officer, go against other JAGs within the same command and still keep your career intact and zealously advocate for your client?
That's a conflict of interest, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's conflicts of interest there. So they could never figure out how to unwind that until they did, which they did in 2010, 2011, by kind of creating this outside organization of other National Guards that I reported to in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and similar to other states. You know, everybody did that. And everybody agreed. That way I got evaluated by this New Jersey JAG. And that way I didn't have to worry about getting a bad evaluation. And everybody knew that I was just doing my job. It all worked. But I was the first one in Rhode Island to have that job. And I got to advocate for soldiers. Our motto was, we defend those who defend America.
Okay.
You know, that's the TDS, the Trial Defense Service motto. And it was a wonderful assignment because, you know, a lot of soldiers are soldiers. They're human, they're young, they make mistakes, poor judgment. So you're just trying to you're trying to get them so they don't wreck the rest of their career, or try to give them a second chance, rehabilitation.
Try to preserve their future in some way.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of times it's like convincing them, look, they did it. Fall on the sword, admit it, come clean, have some honor here. They'll look favorably upon that, take your punishment, your discipline, and then move on. Like handle it with some grace. They'll recognize that you'll overcome it because they know you're young. They know it was stupid. And a lot of it's like, getting caught smoking weed, that kind of thing.
So not rising to the level of treason.
Yes. There are more serious things, and that's dealt with seriously, but most of it's not. But anyway, so that's the military side. But when you talk about advocacy and using like my law degree, I was very fortunate after my Afghanistan deployment, and this circles back to my office mate when I was at the Attorney General's office. The job I had right before I deployed went away. The money went away for it. So I was coming back unemployed. So I put out a siren call like, hey, anybody have any leads? I could use some work. And one of them was my office mate at the Attorney General's office, was now the legislative director for Senator Whitehouse from the great state of Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. He had moved to Washington, D.C., worked for the Department of Justice. If you circle back, when I started working for the Attorney General was Sheldon Whitehouse.
Okay.
So that's how my office mate and I knew Senator Whitehouse, though he knew him better than I did. So he was working for him down in D.C., and as it so happened, Senator Whitehouse had an opening in his Providence office for a veterans and military kind of coordinator, both to help his constituents, but also some project and policy work. And that's when I started working for Senator Whitehouse in 2012, right after I got back. So, and that got me into the veterans space and advocating for veterans. How's that for full circle?
It makes sense that was when I had first started to see your posts on social media about Senator Whitehouse. And I thought, okay, this kind of backs up my thought that whenever I had seen the senator go on one of the cable shows and do a little quick hit interview, I always came away thinking, he's a good guy.
Yes.
But
I'm a big fan, as you can imagine, for many reasons.
And for a long time, a lot of us had been kind of trained to give the side eye to politicians and say, okay, it's their job to look good in public, but who knows what kind of a person they are in private. But I had always gotten a good kind of surface impression of that. And then when I saw you post things about what you were doing and how you were involved in his office, I thought, okay, so that's a perspective that I don't have, but I'm now glad to. It confirmed what I had hoped was true. And it was an interesting angle to get on that.
Yeah, he's the real deal. And I'm not saying that as somebody who worked for him for a few years and has remained friendly with him. I mean, I don't go to his house for dinner or anything of that sort, but he greets me warmly every time he sees me. My dad passed away a few years ago, and he had cancer, and he had heard that he, in his final days, that he was sick and that he was about to pass, and he called me. I hadn't heard, he doesn't call me. So not like we don't have that kind of a relationship. Yeah. But he called me and he left me a message, and I keep it on my phone because it is so wonderful. He just said, I heard your dad is not doing well, and it just, cherish those moments because you can find some special moments in those final days. He obviously lost his father, and, just sharing those couple of quick moments, some thoughts of his, to me, it was really special, and he didn't have to do that, and it meant a lot to me. So it's kind of the person he is, and I've seen it in other context. My favorite photo of me and him together, because, whenever I staffed him at any veteran or military event within the state, so there's a lot of pictures of us together, and there's one of me and him at this fundraiser for this veteran who got blown up by this IED in Afghanistan. Young kid, seriously lost part of his leg, lost the use of one of his arms, badly damaged. And his wife was friends with, somehow they knew his family, and it was a motorcycle ride, which you've probably seen them. Like there's about 20 or 30 motorcycles, and they all raise money at a VFW. And there was nobody else was there. This was just like a bunch of VFW guys trying to raise some money for this kid. But the senator heard about it. He wanted to go, and he went. There was no press. There was nothing like that. I saw him write his check, and he gave it to the organizer. And then both of us are standing there watching the motorcycles go by. And somebody took the photo of us. And we're just kind of standing there watching. It was just a really cool shot of us. And I gave it to him, and he signed the bottom of it. He wrote this really nice note. Something to the effect, you had my back on this day and many others, and I wish you well, going forward, because I was leaving his office to, moving on. Again, just another indication of the kind of person he was. He is.
It is reassuring when you discover that somebody in public life that you admire actually is a decent person.
We're very, I know this is not a political podcast, and I won't go, too deep into all of that, but it's Rhode Island, we have our greatest strength is our size. We're so small that you really do get to interact a lot with our state leaders, including our congressional delegation. And just being in the veteran space, politicians are politicians, and they come out to these veterans events all the time.
Yeah.
So I know our congressional delegation, at least at a surface level, pretty well. But even at that level, they're pretty genuine. Like Jack Reed, our senior senator, who's the ranking member on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was the chair when the Democrats had the Senate. He's genuine, a regular guy. He still lives in the same house in Warwick, where he always has been. And same thing with our two congressmen. So we're very blessed, very blessed.
And at this point, I'm going to hit the pause button. As will occasionally happen, my chat with Lieutenant Colonel JOLIN ventured far afield. You'll notice we've hardly talked about the 88th Army Band, or almost any other one. In episode 67, I'll get you the second part of our conversation, and who knows, maybe we'll drop some more names of public figures. And we'll get you some specifics about how JAG officers, Army lawyers, get by on deployment in Afghanistan. For now, after observing a short fermata, we'll move into the dogfight. Thanks so much for staying with me. Here comes the dogfight. This episode's dogfight could be a continuation of the second strain, wherein I talked about my drum corps watching life, particularly through the lens of the Boston Crusaders. In the 4 decades or so in which I've been aware of the drum corps activity, I've picked out corps to root for based on 2 main criteria. First, I root for corps that have members or staff that I know personally somehow. And second, I root for corps whose shows I've historically enjoyed. And I think those 2 priorities are listed in the proper order. Since the late 1980s, I've known people who have marched with DCI and formerly DCA ensembles, including the 7th Regiment, the Bluecoats, the Boston Crusaders, the Cadets, the Crossmen, Fusion Corps, the Glassmen, the Hawthorne Caballeros, Magic of Orlando, the Reading Buccaneers, the Spartans, Star of Indiana, and the Sunrisers. And I've been pulling for corps whose design teams or instructional staffs have included friends or colleagues of mine, and those have included the Academy, the Boston Crusaders, the Bushwhackers, the Cadets, Carolina Crown, the Cavaliers, the Crossmen, Jersey Surf, the Madison Scouts, the Reading Buccaneers, Star of Indiana, and the Troopers. To be clear, I did not have friends associated with all of those corps all at once. Otherwise, I'd have been rooting for everybody, everywhere, all the time. Some years it was some groups, other years others. And it was kind of fun because obviously not every corps is in contention for a DCI or DCA title all the time, so you get used to rooting for some groups that are competitive, but you're pretty sure they're not going to take the big prize. And I think it makes it somewhat easier to say go team in a way that steers away from go cadets beat the devils and more toward a less points-driven appreciation of whatever's going on the field. And since I don't have any kids of my own, this is as close as I'm going to get to being a band parent up in the stands yelling, inside my own head of course, "That's my kid down there, go team!" So this year, and this Thursday evening as I head over to my local theater and lay out my money so I can go watch quarterfinals at the movies, to paraphrase a rugby cliche, the real winner will be drum corps. But I'll be rooting for and clenching my fists a little tighter in support of the Sunrisers, where I know a member of the cymbal line, the Hawthorne Caballeros, one of whose drum majors you heard from back in episode 18 last June, and the Boston Crusaders, many of whose staff members are drawn from the UMass Amherst ranks, and who are, as has been noted, the closest thing geographically that I have to a home team. So, go teams!
In our next episode, we'll check in on final results and such. But for the moment, just at this moment, it's still anybody's game, and you can't count anybody out. Okay, one last pause to catch our breath, and then we'll wrap things up for this episode. Thanks for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the CODA. For the CODA this week, a moment of shameless self-promotion. Although earlier in this episode, Mike JOLIN and I did assure each other that we should maybe not fret too hard about whether such a thing should be viewed as shameless, really. So, a tiny community calendar notice about the community band that I am pleased to conduct. If you're within driving distance of central Massachusetts, this might be an opportunity for you. The Nashoba Valley Concert Band is gigging on Wednesday evening, August 13, and Sunday afternoon, August 17. On the 13th, we are returning to the Townsend Senior Center for a 6:30 p.m. concert. That location is an unusual one for an outdoor concert in that the venue has an indoor venue acoustic sense. In 2007, a generous donation was made to the town of Townsend by the head of a local tech company in the form of a new public library building, or at least the funding for its design and construction. And the town decided to build its new senior center next door to the new library with a connecting passageway between. Together, forming a V-shape, the two buildings create something of a town village, and the band will perform in the crook of that V, with audience members bringing lawn chairs and sitting in the paved entry roundabout nearby. The concerts we've done there before have been tons of fun, with very responsive audiences making it a really fun environment, especially with the ferociously aromatic popcorn machine and various other snacks that are always made available during the intermission. And on the 17th, the Nashoba Valley Concert Band will be performing as part of a picnic event involving the members of Sudbury United Methodist and Greenwood Memorial United Methodist congregations. Sudbury UMC is where I do my church musician work, and one other time a couple years ago I got to bring my community band to my church home. And the Greenwood Church is a congregation in Dorchester, Massachusetts, with whom Sudbury has maintained a sister church relationship for most of 30 years. The short version of that long story is the demographics of those two congregations are quite different in a lot of ways that you might imagine, considering that one is located within the official boundaries of the city of Boston, and the other is located in one of the relatively affluent suburbs of Boston. We're reinvigorating that relationship after the COVID pandemic kind of upended a lot of stuff, including that relationship, and we're doing it with a little food and fellowship in the Sudbury Church's backyard, and then a band concert out front. And although technically this is an event that, well, certainly the food part is meant for our two congregations, I would judge that anyone who's interested in wind band music and who wanted to head on over to Sudbury around 3 o'clock or so would be welcome to bring a lawn chair and get hit in the ears by a band which I like to describe as a pack of good people who also happen to play their instruments really well. Information about those two concerts is included in this week's show notes. Again, dear listener, you are cordially invited to attend either or both, and by all means, come say hello if you do. And that's a wrap for this episode of BandWagon. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at the pod's website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using the email address heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that I do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to this episode's news items, conversation topics, and my interview guest, Mike JOLIN, can be found in our show notes, as can a link to BandWagon's merch store, thanks to the good folks at TeePublic. And here's a DVD bonus extra for you fine people who listen through all the credits and such at the end of every episode. In the UMass drumline, certainly in the 1980s, everybody in the battery was assigned a nickname, and the future Lieutenant Colonel Mike JOLIN's nickname was Fruit Loop. I frankly cannot imagine why, because after all, Fruit Loop became an Army Judge Advocate General lawyer. I thought I'd leave that out of the trio section, but ain't that a band thing? It is. Where was I? Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, please do share it in the direction of someone whom you think might not be a listener yet. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with the podcast, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts,
or wherever fine podcasts are sold. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again in a fortnight. I'm Rob Hammerton. Level up, level up, level up, level up, level up.